Okay, Alex, I'm going to start in Spanish and then I'm going to switch to English and pass it on to Stephanie and then start.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Stephanie.
Gracias a todos por estar con nosotros. Este es un seminario gratis con toda la buena intención de compartir con ustedes tecnología de avanzada. Nova está repleta en su website de información que es en extremo útil para profesionales, para artistas y para personas que quieren sacar sus sueños adelante y desarrollarlos en distintas industrias. Esperamos que puedan visitar el website, que puedan darnos un follow en nuestras redes sociales y podamos entonces compartir y seguir compartiendo con ustedes y con toda la comunidad en Latinoamérica este contenido de altísima calidad. Estamos seguros que van a quedar impresionados con lo que van a ver el día de hoy en este MetaHumans, VR y el futuro del negocio. Así es que voy a hacer un switch, un cambio a inglés y luego vamos a continuar con nuestro invitado especial. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this exciting webinar on the transformative power of virtual reality. Today, we'll delve into VR's potential to revolutionize industries like design, training, sales experiences, and live entertainment. VR, as you know, is no longer science fiction. It's a powerful technology with the potential to change how we work, how we learn, and how we interact with everything around us. Today, our host is Alex Coulomb, founder of Agile Lens. You'll hear from him and gain a deeper understanding of how VR can impact things like design, experience projects virtually before construction begins, saving time and resources. Training, immerse yourself in realistic scenarios for more engaging and effective learning. Social communication, raise awareness and empathy for impact social issues. Sales, offer personalized and interactive customer experiences that drive sales. Live entertainment, democratize access to live experiences with a good audience. Now, you may ask, why this technology? Well, there's multiple reasons. I'm pretty sure Alex will delve into that. But we can share with you, one, it creates a more immersive and interactive experience compared to traditional methods like brochures and websites. Customers can virtually step inside a product or environment, foster a deeper connection and allowing them to understand better its features and benefits. It allows salespeople to showcase products and services dynamically and interactively. This can be particularly helpful for complex products and those that can be difficult to demonstrate in a physical setting. And something related to visual showrooms or training experiences, eliminating the need for physical prototypes or travel expenses. These can save a ton of money for businesses and improve overall sales efficiency. So I'll pass it on to our post-production manager, Stephanie. Go on, Steph.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. By incorporating this VR into your sales strategy is so amazing. You can start out from the competition as well, and this can be a major advantage, especially in industries where innovation is key. And thank you for all that are incorporating to this webinar. So as a recap of what we're going to watch today, and Alex, our host, will be telling us today as well. He will be telling us about these specific projects of Agile Lens and see how they're pushing boundaries with redefining luxury real estate sales, gamifying training with real world impact, VR full social, transforming automotive sales, and also how VR takes center stage and way much more.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me. My name is Victor Andres, and thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. We have a special guest, like they say, Alex. And you know what, Seth? You're right. The VR here with the power to revolutionize how we work, we learn, and even connect. By attending this webinar, you're going to gain valuable insights into all these capabilities. We also recommend to explore how the VR can be incorporated into your field and also unlock new possibilities. If you have any question, guys, don't worry about it. Please don't hesitate to use the Q&A chat below. And thank you for joining us. Alex, my friend, this show is all yours.
Great. Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Stephanie. Really happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and excited to chat with you all today about MetaHumans VR and the future of business. Everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Great, fantastic. Also, speaking of thumbs and all that, so in addition to the business use cases we'll be talking about today, I also see virtual reality as having a tremendous educational potential. And so I have young children who have been VR ever since they were 2 years old in very curated ways. And I do want to point out that the work that they've been able to do through, learning how to identify three-dimensional space better and solve really complex spatial puzzles and that sort of thing has been really cool to witness. And I'm excited to see what kind of new careers come up as they get older. Also, I have some beautifully painted nails right now because my 6-year-old insisted. So you're just going to have to match the clashing business suit and the nails. And I hope that's okay. So to jump right in, let's go into who I am. Hi, Alex Coulomb. As we've briefly mentioned already, I run a New York City creative studio called Agile Lens Immersive Design. Been around for about 10 years now. I'm also very fortunate to have a close partnership with Epic Games and Unreal Engine. I became an authorized training instructor and have been fortunate enough to teach some of Epic's biggest clients internally for them. But then I also have the only, and by that extension, best authorized training center in all of Manhattan. So we have a lot of courses that we give on using Unreal Engine for particular purposes across a lot of different industries. I also have a podcast called the Unofficial Unreal Engine Podcast. We just filmed our season finale a couple nights ago with Matt Workman, of course, in virtual production, Corey Williams, Corey Strasberger. We've had a lot of wonderful guests. And if you're interested in some of the topics we're going over today, please do like and subscribe to our fun little podcast. And yes, I did allude to the XR dad thing a little bit, but ex-architect, I like to use that phrase because I am a trained architect, and I felt over time more and more of this pull to use these emerging technologies like virtual reality to construct virtual spaces and virtual worlds and virtual performances in a way that didn't necessarily have to abide by the laws of the real world. Though, of course, what we'll be talking about today will be examples both of using virtual reality and similar technologies for pre-visualization of things that will exist in the real world, but then also experiences that are excellent in their own right and are entirely virtual and never need to have a real world component. So I hope the different industries and case studies we'll be covering today will be useful. And it's very fun for me to look back on the past 10 years, thinking about how far this technology has come, where I could have easily given an hour-long presentation 10 years ago, just explaining what virtual reality was. And now I feel like we've probably got a decent audience here that understands at least the basics of what the capabilities of this technology are. So I'm excited to go a little bit more intermediate and talk about some very specific use cases that I think have been really wonderful over the years. Most of these projects are fairly recent, though. So to talk about real estate and architecture, we'll focus a little bit on the Four Seasons project. There's also an hour-long talk specifically about that project on Unreal Engine's YouTube channel from Unreal Fest last year, if you want to dive more into that one. We did a really cool project with Fair Worlds for Dell, and that speaks a little bit to virtual reality's potential for training. We're very involved with training right now with a couple other large companies that unfortunately are under NDA. So I can't talk about those ones yet, but I'll try to illuminate some of the larger things we've discovered with VR training through our Dell example. We're going to talk a little bit about social impact with Body of Mine, which is our very first publicly released app on the Quest Store. This was in partnership with Cameron Kostopoulos, and a really wonderful piece that teaches about what it's like to be trans. Started off as a very heavy desktop VR experience, and we helped him port it to get onto the Quest Store, the very first LGBTQ plus app to ever be on that store. And now it is getting a really lovely response from the much wider audience who can see it outside of the festival circuit. For Automotive, we'll talk briefly about an experience we did with Vodafone. This is also where we'll dive a little more into AI and some of the things we learned about having an effective level of communication with a digital character, MetaHumans in particular. Pretty much all these projects do involve MetaHumans, so you'll see them them plenty of times along the way. And then we'll wrap up with Christmas Carol. This is an annual live virtual reality MetaHumans show that we put on. I've been having meetings all week about this show, and we try to do these little mini hackathons at Agile Lens to just try to like knock out one particular thing. So I'll talk a little bit more, of course, about each of these projects as we get to them, but just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. And if we have a little bit of extra time, we'll see how we're doing toward the end and how many questions there are. There is kind of like a little bonus thing I might show you as well. We'll see how it goes.
Great.
Yeah. Meant to have that slide up the whole time. Just one of our early examples of using virtual reality with architecture. So you're seeing the Unreal Engine render, and then juxtaposed over that is the construction site. This is the Brockman Hall for Opera over in Dallas, Texas. So starting with this first topic of redefining luxury real estate sales, you're getting a little sneak preview of our VR showroom in Austin, Texas, which I'm actually flying back to on Monday. We have some very, very VIP folks coming by to check it out. But before we dive into that, I think it is useful to talk a little bit about how I got to the point of, building a 5,000 square foot virtual reality showroom for luxury real estate with a really incredible team. And it came from that background of being a trained architect who immediately saw the potential of virtual reality to help us better communicate design intent. And I've found myself many times working without the benefit of virtual reality from 2017 was my first architecture job, 2017 all the way through 2013 when I finally got my hands on the Oculus Rift DK1, struggling to communicate what we were trying to propose. And so I started working with Fisher Dax Associates and Josh Dax there back in 2012. And I would sit in these meetings, for example, where we're designing theaters all over the world. And it really became obvious to me at a certain point that there is a literacy to reading traditional plans and sections and elevations and even renders to a certain degree that you learn how to do, of course, if you're training as an architect, but many people don't. You can't really show them a plan and get them to understand what that human experience will be. But, you give someone a VR headset and they pop this on their head and so much less explanation is required. They can just look around the room. So we went from doing these kinds of early pre-visualizations of just looking in the headset and looking at the theater to one of my favorite projects, which was David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center, because this had that tactile element. And anytime you can add tactility into a virtual reality experience, we call this an immersion multiplier, because now you're making things feel more tangible. So in this case, for Lincoln Center, we had the seats that were actually going to be proposed to be in the space. We had mock-ups of the actual balcony areas, and we had these swappable railings so people could actually understand what it felt like to be at different levels of the hall and stand up and look down and have a sense of like vertigo and what was the optimal height for how it felt to be in that seat, but then also for sight lines. At a certain point, are you not seeing what's on stage as well because of what's there? So here's kind of the view looking the other way and the experience people were able to have as we kind of took a bunch of VIP stakeholders for Lincoln Center through this experience. So I probably did 30, maybe 40 different theaters in the early days that was like very specific to helping out Fisher Dax Associates. Agile Lens grew directly out of Fisher Dax as I was doing more and more virtual reality work, sometimes for them, sometimes on my own. We got to a point where Joshua Dax and I just kind of decided like this should really be its own company just to entirely focus on virtual reality. And it's been great to continue to partner with Fisher Dax and many other architecture firms while continuing to branch out into things like real estate and luxury and social impact and all the other topics we'll be covering today. This final image is what the actual venue looks like in New York City right now, in about the same area that we were testing out some of these studies for the theater seats. Now, one thing we needed to figure out pretty quick, and I'll pause this video for a moment, was as Agile Lens was taking on more and more work, and we're a small boutique studio, there's only 5 full-time employees, plenty of independent contractors, but to continue to make at least Fisher Dax Associates happy, we needed to come up with an easier way to allow them to pre-visualize their projects in virtual reality without us having to do a lot of custom hand-holding. So as I mentioned, we did a lot of very direct VR projects for them in the early days. But one thing that's been really fun to expand on is something we call Blueprint Immersive, which takes something Unreal Engine has called Datasmith. This is an ingestion tool for taking 3D data from many, many other sources, Rhino, 3ds Max, Revit, etc., and kind of turning it into a file format that Unreal Engine can understand. And what's cool about this, and you can try this out on your own as well, is you don't even need to have the Unreal Engine editor open. You can have a plugin enabled called Datasmith Runtime, and that allows allows you to actually have just an Unreal Engine, let's call it game running, and then do all sorts of things with that data. So you can very easily set up for yourself a viewer of 3D data that's going to render in Unreal Engine with Lumen, Nanite, whatever settings you might like, kind of beyond the capabilities of Twinmotion, though, because you can get very custom with it. So here we're showing an example where it's basically finding all the Datasmith files, it's populating the space, and it's allowing Fisher DAX to have all these ways to very quickly view different theaters they're working on with different visual styles, as well as a menu of different ways to start to modify the design, annotate it, change materials, jump to different seats in the hall, take snapshots, all through this collaborative method that is really based on not only Datasmith runtime, but another wonderful tool in Unreal Engine called the Collaborative Viewer Template. So, this looks like we've created a very custom application. 80% of what's here is stuff anyone can actually use out of the box with Unreal Engine. We just started to add in a few things that we knew would help architects and designers more, like the ability for theaters to jump to different seats, as well as the ability to easily cycle through design options. So early days of Agile Lens, very much involved in the actual active design of these different spaces. We worked on the Statue of Liberty Museum on Liberty Island. We worked on the shed at Hudson Yards. And we started to develop a bit of a reputation as a company that is a bit of an XR SWAT team that can come in and figure out how to solve really, really difficult problems pretty efficiently. And so we've ended up with a lot of projects where at the beginning, we kind of thought to ourselves, I don't know how we're going to solve that, but we sure are going to try. And we have some ideas. We'll always propose a pretty good menu of different approaches we might have to solve a particular problem. And so moving now into the very near past, something like the Four Seasons Lake Austin project was very, very interesting to us because this was a client who said, I don't want anything that's going to feel like virtual reality. I want something that feels like a time machine that takes you directly into the future, and you are just experiencing exactly what this property is going to look like. Now, this is an incredibly luxurious private residence situation with Four Seasons. Jonathan Kuhn is our direct client. And these properties, if you are buying them, are between $4 million and $50 million. And then in addition to that, there's about $300 million worth of amenities. There's private restaurants and clubhouses and theaters and boat docks. And the idea was that this showroom, this 5,000 square foot showroom that people can just walk around in this multiplayer experience, needed to feel rock solid, no dropped frames. We needed ray tracing on the glass. We needed to do all these things that typically would be impossible to do standalone in VR. But fortunately, we had a great team. So we had D-Box and Matthew Bannister there also acting as the creative director. And they were able to work very hard on creating these beautiful 3D models that were in 3ds Max and could render out as V-Ray. Those models then got passed to PureBlink up in Toronto, and PureBlink got everything into Unreal Engine as these individual scenes that looked absolutely gorgeous and worked well with ray tracing and all the optimization that we needed to add to it. And then the Agile Lens team had to kind of put everything together on site in Austin in this experience that needed to just feel really good. You needed to have this like 52 gigabyte executable file that would just run for all the people there and feel amazing and absolutely great. So the reviews for it have been really nice for some of the people who have stopped by. I think we're making a very good case for some of the more obvious uses of virtual reality here, especially with this level of photorealism. Agile Lens has worked on real estate projects in the past that we felt a little bit sketchy about because it felt like there was kind of a blurry line between concept renderings and concept models and what the finished product was going to be. And you never want someone to be putting on a VR headset and then buying a property that isn't built yet. And then, years later when they move in saying, oh, this is way different from what I saw in VR. It's much smaller. It's, crappier furniture, whatever. So there was something nice about knowing the commitment that our client had here to making it exactly what that final experience is going to be. So anyone who puts on the VR headset, you want them to have confidence that they are just, again, looking into the future, and it's this kind of time machine experience. So some of the ways that this got built, first of all, is the actual showroom. And we thought at the beginning that this was going to have columns in it holding it up, but it's basically a tent on a cliff on the top of a giant mountain, and there's wind and these green lights you're seeing. This was a multiplayer system we were trying to use called anti-latency that unfortunately would just wave in the breeze, and so that completely messed up our approaches at multiplayer. On the right, though, you're seeing this thing that we had to keep striving for, which was to have this synchronicity between looking at someone in the real world and seeing where their headset was in VR, because as you move around this 5,000 square foot space, that becomes very, very complicated. You can see a little bit of how the space would look when people are inside the experience, because you want everything to be lit in just the right way for what virtual reality likes to see. This is a view of the tent up on the cliff. And this is our very special headsets, which got more and more complicated as time went on because of the need to have this kind of precision accuracy in a very large space. As you might imagine, there's not a lot of virtual reality experiences that need you to have a super clean wireless AirLink experience as you walk 80 feet from one side of a room to another. And so in addition to some very complicated networking that had to be set up in here, we also had to develop our own OptiTrack active markers. So we got real good at 3D printing real fast so that we had the best way for the OptiTrack cameras in the space to see where all these headsets were and make sure that we always had a good sense of where they were. Now, that sounds easy. And if you do the experience, it feels seamless. In reality, there's a lot of bells and whistles and gears happening in the background. This is a part of the clubhouse, and you can see our little virtual golf course back there. So this is the view the host sees. So the clients are just like, yay, everything's perfect. The thing is that there's really no way to constantly be accounting for the drift that can happen in virtual reality. Like the inside-out tracking of a Quest, for example, is great, but over time, it's going to get offset. And OptiTrack, of course, is very, very accurate. This gets used in major movie studios and for precision motion capture, including with MetaHumans. But you don't want to be updating a headset with that location 90 times a second. It's going to feel really jittery. There's a lot of magic inside-out stuff that happens in a standalone headset to make it a smooth and comfortable experience. So we basically had to give the host the ability to see 3 headsets for every single person. So the green is where the other person thinks they are in VR. We're actually allowing for some drift intentionally. That's important because if someone is looking at something and saying, wow, the host needs to have a good sense of what they're looking at. The white headset is where OptiTrack thinks the headsets are at any particular moment. That's important because the black headset is what you would see when you kind of lift the headset up and find another person. And so if those start to drift too far apart, you need to recalibrate. So it's up to the host to decide when's a good moment to do that. When's it not going to disrupt the experience too much? Because the longer the experience goes on, the more people drift apart and the more they're in danger of doing the worst possible thing, which would be bumping into a wall or furniture or each other. So, I'd say a lot of our projects have had this sort of very clean and seamless user experience for the clients and users, of course, but there often is a lot of sometimes sweaty acrobatics happening on the host side to make sure that that experience looks and sounds really good. One thing that was really fun, of course, I mentioned that we have designed a lot of theaters. There's this beautiful private theater inside the experience, and we actually were able to have these $6,000 Figueres chairs shipped from Spain to make this like a perfectly synchronous experience to sit down and then actually watch a movie with a $10,000 sound system, like blasting at you with subwoofers and all that, while in VR feeling like you're just in this experience. So that's kind of the grand finale of how this goes, and the reaction is always quite wonderful. Here's a little bit of what it looks like from the host view as they see, different footprints on the ground of how they need to get everyone to line up. You can see little hints of some of the white versus black headsets here. And the host always has a lot more information than everyone else. They also have a laser pointer so they can draw attention to people. They can record certain things. They can check the time. They can, of course, control which experience you're seeing when. The idea of having the space so large was to avoid artificial locomotion. For the most part, we just want to make sure people can literally look at something and walk over to it and not deal with teleportation or anything like that. But of course, we are taking you across this entire huge property. So we are looking for opportunities to make it easy to get from point A to point B. That's Four Seasons. It just occurred to me because these are kind of distinct categories. Maybe this is just a brief moment to just pause and say, any questions about architecture, real estate, Four Seasons before I move on? Yeah.
Yeah, there's Sam Mars. He has a question and he says, in your opinion, what is the best VR device to showcase a VR experience for real estate?
Yes. Oh, that is such a good question. We had a few slides on this because of how important this question is in another presentation. So here's the thing. There's no easy answer. This project started out, I've got my Vario headset just out of reach here. It started out as a Vario project. For those who don't know, Vario is one of the top class VR headsets you can get out there. They're very expensive and they have human eye resolution. They also have these nice features like they will automatically adjust to the spacing of your eyes. You know, there's a problem in VR sometimes where if you don't know the spacing of someone's eyes, you end up with the eyes too far apart or too close together, and they might feel a little bit uncomfortable. The Vario experience, best in class, amazing. Two problems we ran into. One, it's tethered. So you're very limited with how much people can move unless you're going to give them the equivalent of like an IV drip and move a computer with them as they move around the space. That wasn't ideal. The other thing too is because of the level of photorealism that we're trying to chase for this project with, again, ray tracing and all these things you wouldn't typically see in VR, we weren't really able to take full advantage of the Vario resolution. Like as soon as we cranked the resolution up really any higher than what you'd be getting with a traditional headset, even on, you know, the most powerful RTX 4090 Puget workstations that we had, you still were going to start to see frame drops. So we then decided we wanted to use Quest 3 if we could. The problem with Quest 3 was that we felt like it wasn't a very premium headset. So this kind of goes in that luxury direction. This, to our client, felt too consumer facing. He also thought that the Vive headset felt too plastic. So he settled on wanting us to deal with the MetaQuest Pro, very much because of the form factor and the color gamut. So this is our very discerning client kind of directing what he was most happy with in the end. And he has a tech background as well. So he's coming at this from an informed perspective. So we liked the way that the Quest headset sat on someone's head, especially if they'd never done VR before. And the other thing too is if you remove the light blockers, the equivalent of, if I just kind of take this out here, the light blockers that you can remove from the Quest Pro can still attach to your head if you do this, and it's quite comfortable and it's balanced because the battery's in the back, but it actually lets you see the world around you a little bit in your peripheral vision. A lot of people would say, well, in virtual reality, don't you always just want to see what the virtual experience is? And sometimes that's true, but especially for people who haven't done a lot of virtual reality, it can be a really helpful anchor to have some sense of where you actually are in the real world. And people are good at focusing. Like you can kind of, you know, just same way in a movie theater, like you'd be aware of the fact that you're in a movie theater and there are seats and you're not actually inside the movie. You know, with virtual reality, you can be very engaged with this stereoscopic live experience happening. But by seeing the real world a little bit, that helps to anchor you. So a very long-winded way of answering your question and saying that we ultimately settled on the MetaQuest Pro, which, by the way, isn't a very popular headset now. You can find them pretty cheap if you get them used.
Great. We
Okay,
have
Alex,
questions.
yeah, tell me.
We have two more questions. One is from Jesse. What hardware was used for streaming into the headsets to cover an area of 5,000 square feet?
Yeah, so we were very lucky because we're using AirLink, which is the out-of-the-box streaming method that all Quest headsets support. We also were able to get help from someone named Amanda Watson, who actually invented AirLink back when she was working at Meta Oculus at the time she was there. So we were able to get like a level of customer support that's pretty unusual. And she showed us some like Android ADB commands that could like help increase bandwidth and all that. But you know, we tried virtual desktop streamer. We tried a few different methods of like getting that signal out there, but the inside out tracking and the way that it can reproject in particular, so we can be hitting a target frame rate of 45 frames a second, but it's going to feel like 90. And there's just kind of some black magic inside the Meta headsets that take care of that in a really compelling way. So we were using vanilla AirLink, but we also had a router set up with Netgear Nighthawk routers placed very strategically throughout the space so that as you moved across this 5,000 square feet, it would very seamlessly transition you from one to another. We also had to find the right balance of how many headsets should be on each local area network. And the answer for us ended up being two for every network, and then they could kind of all track around the space. We also found that Wi-Fi 6, of course, made a huge difference because there wasn't as much interference, not as much network traffic, especially up on a big cliff, a little bit harder to do at trade shows. And yeah, and we finally got to a point where we could pump out, you know, 200 megabits per second to each of maybe 6 headsets. And it was a very clean, very sharp signal. So yeah.
A lot of business, a lot of things to take into account. We have Kadepun asking, was the Four Seasons project a VR standalone project?
I wish it could be done in standalone. We have been experimenting with Gaussian splats to see how much we can capture of the feeling of how photorealistic this is in a standalone device, and we've had some progress there. I'd say we're somewhere around like 30 frames a second, which, you know, can reproject to 60. Still not a super comfortable experience. This is all running on desktop VR. So this is every single headset is getting its rendering power from a computer in a server room. Each one has an RTX 4090 and 128 gigabytes of RAM and a best-in-class Ryzen CPU. So we're really like cranking out the most power we can. You better believe once the RTX 5090s come out, we'll be all over those. We're also trying to find ways to have multiple GPUs rendering for each headset. So that's been a fun ongoing R&D effort. And yeah, I mean, we're fortunate we have a client here who really wants to push the boundaries of luxury VR real estate and how amazing that can look and feel.
Great. Okay, you can continue. We have done with the questions.
Yeah, great. Yeah, please keep the questions coming. Those are excellent. So yeah, it's been a really wonderful project, and we're lucky to continue to be working on it. These other case studies will be a little bit quicker, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. So this was a really cool project we did with Infinite Reality. We've done a few projects with them, including an Unreal Engine version of Burning Man back in 2020. We've done some cool 360 training videos with like taking someone that we film over a green screen with 2 lenses and compositing them into an Unreal Engine environment. And I feel lucky that they've just kind of thought of us again as sort of an XR SWAT team that'll jump into any project. So they came to us last year and said, hey, we're doing this big thing for London Tech Week for Vodafone. There's going to be the showroom, and we want to show what it's like to have a car salesman who gets you excited. And we said, yep, that sounds great. We can help with that. Optimizing, using London, doing ray tracing here, whatever you might need, and MetaHumans. And we assumed, because our history with MetaHumans up to this point had been having live actors portraying them, that they wanted our help with kind of embodying a MetaHuman and then being a salesman through that, which we would have felt very comfortable with. And they said, no. There's going to be an AI MetaHuman that needs to be not super awkward to talk to. They meant that everywhere from the uncanny valley of looking at one to also the audio of how it would sound. So this was a really fun investigation, especially because most of the experiences we work on, we try not to just have a VR version. We try to have a desktop version as well. And so in this case, Infinite Reality was very focused on making sure the desktop version was as clean and powerful and worked as well as possible. And then we had to try to, in real time while they were building that, convert it into a VR experience that worked really well. So here's one example. Oh, wait, sorry. You guys probably can't hear my audio, can you? Hold on real quick. Yeah. I did say that I wasn't going to need to share audio. So give me one more moment here. Share sound. Weird. It's grayed out. Why are you not? Let me try stop share first. Share. So weird. I can't select share sound. That's okay. I can tell you what is happening. Okay, so we tried In-World AI, which is a great piece of AI tech that can connect to MetaHumans. We've also used one called Convey, C-O-N-V-A-I. And then we wanted to attach the voice to 11 Labs, because 11 Labs can give you very realistic sounding voices. And so what's happening here is we're just asking her to tell us a little bit about the car, and she can explain whatever we need to hear about it, from the color options to the mileage, to different options that it comes in. And if I skip forward, yeah, you can see that you can ask her to change some of the options for the car, and then it changes in real time. And it's all conversational. You can just be having a regular conversation. And her hand movements and her lip sync and all that are pretty good. As time went on, we started to try to get more and more little nuances with trying to make sure animations didn't repeat too much. Tried to make sure the eye contact wasn't always looking directly at you. You want people to feel a little bit more natural, where they kind of turn their head away sometimes. But you can answer all sorts of great questions, and could even do things like allow you to pull up a menu to configure the car in different ways. This was a second version where we started to play with some different lighting. And the only audio here I would have pointed out is that this is where we got 11 Labs working. So the difference between how the audio sounds in the first one versus the second one is night and day. This just sounds like a very natural person talking to you, which all the research for this was fantastic, because one of our favorite things to do at Agile Lens is take research that we're doing for client projects and take it forward to other client projects, but also our own personal work. So as a company that has a deep love of theater, you're going to see how all this research into AI, humans, later started to play into the acting work we do, and also trying to balance all that out against like ethical uses of AI. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, this is all I have for our AI showroom. Any quick questions on this before I move on?
Yes, there's a question from Sam again. Hi, Sam. So he's telling us, if you had the opportunity to change something, what would you like to improve or change about the Meta Quest Pro?
Oh, sure. Well, here's the thing. In 9 out of 10 ways, the Quest 3 is a cheaper and better headset. The pass-through quality is better. The chip inside that powers this, the XR2 Gen 2, better. Almost everything about this is better, except for the form factor and the color gamut. So the kind of the range of colors that can be seen in the MetaQuest Pro. So if the MetaQuest Pro is going to be better, just take all the good guts of this and you know, the cameras and the Qualcomm chip in there, and just put that in the Quest Pro. We were really excited. We were talking to LG for a little while about a potential launch experience that was going to come with their new headset in the new year, because of the fact that they were going to be producing the Meta Quest Pro 2, and that relationship has kind of gone on ice now. So now it's like, too bad. But we were very excited as those discussions went on about what the specs would be for Meta Quest Pro 2, and the rumors right now are that like Meta's going to do it on their own, but it's not going to come out till 2027. Oh, and of course, the other thing that we love about the MetaQuest Pro is it has face and eye tracking. So that's great for actors and performers. It's also really good for things like analytics. Like if you want to know exactly what's drawing someone's attention, if you want to build heat maps in a VR experience to see where people are looking, eye tracking, of course, is amazing for that. It also helps you squeeze more rendering out of an experience, because if you know exactly where someone's looking, you can actually do what's called foveated rendering, where you kind of shrink down the area in VR that you're rendering at full resolution, and then everything else can be a little bit blurrier. This is another thing that the Vario headsets do, as well as the Apple Vision Pro. And so, yes, I mean, you're hurting my heart a little bit by asking that question, because we would love to improve the MetaQuest Pro beyond what it is right now.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see the last question, Stephanie? I'm not sure if you can.
Yes, from Jess. So was this a desktop or VR experience or standalone, this project?
This one was also desktop VR, and worked on just a regular computer. Now, good question, though, because one thing we've been trying to do for a while is to get these AI systems to work in a totally standalone experience. So again, kind of foreshadowing what we'll talk about with Christmas Carol toward the end of the presentation, we just this week have started to successfully get not in-world AI, which doesn't have Android support and therefore it doesn't have Quest support. We've gotten Conv AI to actually work totally standalone with multiple MetaHumans, and you can have a whole conversation and they talk to each other and you talk to them, and it feels really good. So we're excited to just let people start to experience that for themselves, totally standalone without needing to be connected to a desktop computer at all.
Great.
Yeah. We have another question, one last from this part, from Richard. Hi, Richard. He says, in your experience, what is the maximum time in your experience that you can use VR glasses?
Yeah, so especially in the early days of VR, I'm admittedly in VR less nowadays, now that I'm a little bit more in a managing role at my company, and I'm delegating to my very talented staff. But in the early days of VR, I would spend 10, 12 hours in VR, not necessarily in a row, but in a day. And that was because I was, you know, rocking my world with Tilt Brush. I loved, by the way, training like architects and other designers to be in there, because one thing that felt like a red flag to me very quickly with VR was like, oh, people feel like because you can look around in all directions and walk everywhere, you have to build out everything, and you need all the lighting and everything to be as photorealistic as something like our Four Seasons project. And there's a time and a place for that, but there's also something so beautiful and compelling about a really beautifully drawn sketch of a building or a product using something like Tilt Brush or Gravity Sketch. And so I was doing that all the time. I was letting my imagination run wild with like my ideal master planned designs for buildings and architecture, and not necessarily thinking about what the photorealistic version would look like. I would just sketch it out, and I'd scale up and scale down and think about what it felt like to be in a very tight space and then open up into a much wider space, kind of the way that if anyone's ever seen like a napkin sketch that an architect might do to be like, here's what the, Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao is going to look like. And it just looks like a few squiggly lines, but it's somehow capturing the essence of a piece of architecture or real estate. Doing that, but in a spatialized way where there's still a sense of human scale is amazing. You're not worried about the materials or the lighting or how thick the walls are. You're just getting a sense of the flow and the time it takes to move from point A to point B. So yeah, I mean, in those days, I was in VR all the time. Nowadays, a regular VR session for me is probably 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'm out and doing other things and maybe back in later. Similarly, we would also recommend never design a VR experience that requires someone to be in a headset for more than 30 minutes. That's just going to cut off too much of the population from having a good time in there. And you can, and because there's so much going on, like you can also have a little bit more of a, I want to say like an intense experience where you're getting more across to people in a shorter amount of time anyway, compared to a film or some of the other mediums that VR might be not replacing, but the VR experience itself can do more than a lot of other mediums can in a shorter period of time.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we can continue. There's no more questions.
Cool. All right. Gamified training with real world impact. Yeah. So we're doing, to kind of tease one of the NDA things I can't talk about right now, we're doing a lot of this right now with mixed reality, which is really exciting because then, of course, you're seeing the real world and virtual things on top of the real world. And like what we showed you with the chairs for Four Seasons, it's very location specific. If there's a chair there, a box there, a wall there, a door there, that's all part of the design for how we're training people to do the different things that we're training them to do. And that is so fascinating when you have to make sure the experience itself can respond to different real world rooms and environments and shapes and furniture, especially if you need to have AI that knows like, jump on a table if this is true, don't jump on it if this is true, and have these kinds of logic chains that hold it all together. But the example I can talk about is this really cool thing we did for Dell at a conference they have in Las Vegas every year called Dell Technology World. And so this started as a presentation that Dell would often just use as like a PowerPoint. This was about training people who are going to become cybersecurity experts in the things that Dell was good at. And you see a little hint of like some of the PowerPoint slides back here. But Fairworlds, who's had a really nice partnership with Dell for a while, basically said, what if we actually position the whole thing as you're being hacked, like you're in VR and you're kind of going through this regular PowerPoint presentation, but then it's all being hacked. And then rather than just being told about the ways that you can handle these cybersecurity challenges, you actually need to embody and complete those challenges. So this was a really fun opportunity to collaborate with them and build out some MetaHuman characters that could kind of guide you through the whole experience, all while kind of staying within the branding that Dell wanted to make sure felt like Dell. Whatever Dell means to you, that's what they wanted it to stay within. So I'll give you a little hint of what some of this looked like. This is what it looked like when it would start to hack. You're getting kind of the presentation, and then this other MetaHuman pops up to be like, I'm destroying the experience. And by the way, some of those effects you can do in VR, they feel amazing. It's so cool to actually feel like you're in a fairly recognizable world, and the whole thing distorts in a way that is so much more immersive, of course, than what you'd get from a traditional film. And so this was also the first time we were able to use MetaHuman Animator, which, for those who don't know, is a machine learning tool in Unreal Engine to actually get even more realistic facial capture with MetaHumans, because it will actually use the depth pass of exactly where your face is, and machine learning will like kind of get all the small muscles and figure out exactly what your tongue is doing, which just makes it a much more realistic experience when you're talking inside there. So I'll skim through this a little bit. We can make giant snakes appear for analogy's sake. We did a bit of a ride thing. Hacker comes back. All these little mini games where it's explaining to you like what it's like as you kind of go in and use some of Dell's tools and software to stop the hackers. One interesting thing too is like whenever you're building the VR experience, you kind of want to make it something that can be fun for someone who's never done VR before, but also have some Easter eggs and things that are going to be really compelling for someone like me who's done probably 10,000 hours of VR in his life already. So we always try to like hide little things, whether it's just something visual or a secret level of interactivity. And so this was a really fun project to start to mess with that. You go a little bit further. Yeah, you end up in the server room, solve some things in there, and then you get to play a little game of Tetris. And that was really fun. So just to recap, Dell As a client, very interesting when you're working with like a major brand. Four Seasons, I think, was a little bit easier in this respect because everything was already designed. In this experience, everything needed to be designed, while Dell at any moment could be like, I don't like this color, I don't like this particular room layout. And it kind of needed to like figure out.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier for sure, you know, and ultimately we landed in a place everyone was happy with. But sometimes when you're working with a particular client, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the job.
That's true. That's the job. Yeah.
Oh, and there was one fun little pass-through thing we had for this, because Quest 3 wasn't out yet, but at the end of the experience, and I don't know if this made it into our video, actually, yeah, I mean, where you see black here, the black part here is actually pass-through. So we actually had this moment where everything gets hacked to the point where the entire VR world shuts down, and then you're seeing the real world around you, but it was the black and white version of what Quest 2 could do. Of course, with the Quest 3 now, if this is all in color, this is kind of a cooler way to end the experience.
That's so amazing.
Yeah. Any questions on that?
No, no question for now.
All right, VR for social impact. This is one of the reasons why I got into virtual reality. When I started going to film festivals, early days, Tribeca and Venice, and got to experience some of the work people were doing to help you understand life situations that weren't your own. I think some people kind of overdid it with calling VR like an empathy machine, and now you know exactly what it's like to be a refugee. Like, of course not, but there are ways that VR can certainly bring about broader understanding of different kinds of situations. So I had a friend, Cameron Kostopoulos, who I mentioned, who I didn't know him when he first reached out. He was working on this experience. He was in college. It was a thing that he really wanted to do to help people understand what it felt like to be trans and to feel like the body that you're in is not the right body. And he thought avatars would be a great way to demonstrate that. If you could see a variety of avatars in front of you and just kind of understand that even though you're moving and the avatar is moving, that it doesn't feel like you or your body. So he built this experience in desktop VR and was kind of DMing me on Twitter all the time to ask for like MetaHuman help and like what are some of the ways this could be a little bit better. And we cleaned up some IK stuff before it went to Venice. And he won a ton of awards, like all sorts of great awards for social impact and the jury award at South by Southwest and all this stuff. And I was very proud of him and very happy to watch from the sidelines. But then fortunately, Cameron was able to secure a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, who wonderfully will give money to these kinds of experiences. If anyone is also like, I want to build a social impact experience, Rockefeller Foundation, the Sloan Foundation, the National Center for the Arts Foundation, these are things that can actually help with these kinds of experiences. And the what the grant was for was making this very, very complicated, heavy, unoptimized desktop VR experience that was requiring Vive trackers and like 10 minutes of calibration before you could even start the experience, and, you know, would only be touring at festivals, into something that could go in the MetaQuest store. And the reason that became possible was because Meta released something that's available to everyone called the Movement SDK. And it's actually a very robust way that the cameras here, especially in the Quest 3, are able to see where your body is and do a pretty good job, at least from your waist up, to figure out where your body is and how it should be moving. The waist down, it does some like very basic things like you're probably taking a step now, but it's not actually looking at your legs. But we thought this would be a way to have an experience that could reach a much wider variety of people. The challenges were getting the Movement SDK working, getting it to run on a standalone headset that's 1/20th as powerful as the computer that was being used to run this before, and to find any other opportunities to make this a more powerful experience. So we ended up adding things like the ability to share your own stories and hear playback from other people inside the experience as well. So here's a little bit of what it would look like. So you'd look down and you might think like, I don't have tattoos, or I'm not a woman, or whatever. And you'd see all these different kinds of bodies. But as the experience goes on and you're hearing all these stories of people who have been discriminated against in different contexts, or have lost relationships with their family or loved ones, I think what's so remarkable about the experience, which I hope we've preserved all the way into the Quest version, is that at first, everything feels very alien. You're kind of like, this is wrong. Like, this doesn't feel right at all. And the more of these bodies you go through and the more experiences you hear, at a certain point, you're just kind of like, well, what is a body anyway? Like, we've all got these souls. We've all got this desire to relate to each other. And by the end of it, I think what you're really thinking is like, well, we're all human, aren't we? We have this shared life experience. We're all here together on the planet. We got to work together and try to do the best we can with what we have. And I think it's a really uplifting message. Here's a little bit of what the Quest Quest trailer looks like. And this is available on the Quest store right now for anyone who wants to check it out. The whole experience takes place inside basically a chest cavity. So it's very, very intimate. Turn down the volume so I can hear myself talk. And as you emerge into here, you have this kind of mirror experience, which again, challenged with the Movement SDK to make sure that it could do a good job of making you feel like there's a body over there. Though we realized at a certain point that we could really lean into some of the mismatches between what the body in the mirror is doing and what your body is doing, because that really just helps with the sense of dysphoria. All these metahumans who, by the way, needed to be like hyper optimized to run well on standalone. We had to reduce the shader counts and the materials and the polygons for everything, an insane amount. But if you start to move your arm in a certain way and they move their arm in a slightly different way, we realize that's actually great. That just adds to that sense of like, that's not my body, something's wrong, and moving you from a place of discomfort to a place of acceptance and feeling really good about that. We've also, I don't want to go too deep into this because it'll make me really sad, but I also be really fortunate that we've been able to work on a couple projects that were basically hackathons over the weekend, where we found out very last minute, for example, that like, you know, there's a kid that has cancer and they don't have very long left and they've got a birthday party and they want to be a mermaid or whatever. So I've been really blown away, not just by what my team members have done, but watching the VR community, for example, do things like, in that example, build all these experiences. Like, she wants to be a mermaid, we're going to freaking make her a mermaid, and having all these experiences ready to go over a weekend that's there, you know, for her birthday party. So the social impact thing is still something that we're playing with in various capacities. But when one of those opportunities arises to really make a difference, even just for one person's life, to make them feel different from their everyday circumstances in VR, we do try to jump at those opportunities.
Wow.
Yeah. Any questions about social impact in VR? And I'm just curious too, if anyone here has seen an experience that just really made them question their worldview, or kind of took them on a journey that they'd never been on before.
Well, let me see. I have this one. Okay, from Alfredo.
Yeah.
Do you recommend Unreal Engine or Unity for VR, or another game engine?
Yeah, this could be a solid talk all in itself. So I started in Unity back when the Oculus Rift TK1 came out. I didn't have a background in coding. I basically convinced Josh Dax, my future co-founder, to spend the money to get it to the office. And he was expecting that I'd have something that kind of worked out of the box. Not at all. And so I had to teach myself enough coding to be like, look, we can jump to all the different seats in the theater and cycle through different design options. And that took about like 2 weeks of learning coding as fast as I could every night, because I was so embarrassed by the fact that I had promised him something that would work very quickly by a certain meeting, and then, you know, realizing that wasn't going to happen. My feelings now, yeah. My feelings now are, because I started using Unreal Engine right around the time Datasmith came out, that ingestion method I told you about that makes it much, much easier to get 3D data from other programs into Unreal. I would say that we started to get a lot more work for, let's say, luxury clients across a lot of different verticals when we started to use Unreal. And part of that is just that out of the box, Unreal has, I'd say, a different level of polish, and some of that just has to do with the post-process settings and the bloom and the material quality that you get. But it's also just, there's a certain design aesthetic, I think, to when you are working in Unreal Engine, excuse me, that pushes you in that direction, whereas Unity is a little bit more like prototypey. And so I'd say we still do use Unity when we can for things like rapid prototyping and just trying to knock something out that we're going to look at between us. But over the years, we've built more and more robust templates for ourselves in Unreal Engine. And now we're probably like 90% Unreal Engine. The last big Unity project we did is actually the bonus that I'll maybe show you at the end of this presentation. And that one we did in Unity because of the fact that it required a lot of volumetric capture, and volumetric capture just has a lot more capabilities in Unity compared to Unreal Engine. But, you know, out of the box, Unity and Unreal, they both have great VR templates. They use OpenXR, so they can port to a lot of different headsets. And what I like about Unreal right now, though, is if you want to develop for something like the Apple Vision Pro, Unity is really treating this as its own platform, which is what Apple wants. Unreal is being a little bit more rebellious with this, and they are pretending that everything with the Apple Vision Pro should be OpenXR. Not true. Apple is not a member of the Kronos group or using OpenXR, but the way that Unreal is kind of forcing it to be OpenXR means that if you build, for example, a VR project for, I'll say, the MetaQuest 3, and it is using hand tracking, that exact same project, including the hand tracking and all the gestures you've set up and the visual quality, will port very seamlessly over to the Apple Vision Pro with barely changing anything because of those kind of OpenXR hooks that say hand tracking is hand tracking is hand tracking. Mind you, there are other issues with getting Unreal Engine to run well on Apple Vision Pro right now. But the other advantage is that for Unity, you need a paid license, and Unreal Engine, you don't, as long as you're making less than $1 million a year. But, you know, they're both great engines. The capabilities of what you can do in both are quite remarkable. If I was starting over again right now, I would probably try to do a week in each engine and see which one is kind of jiving with me better, which, by the way, is exactly what I did years ago when I was trying to decide between Maya and 3ds Max. And so I tried both. And for whatever reason, 3ds Max just felt better to me. Some of my other friends went over to Maya, and you'll probably have a similar feeling with Unity and Unreal.
Like everybody else, like everybody else. I think, Victor Andres, you have a question, right?
Yeah, it's from Jesse. It says, how do you get this luxury type of clients to engage with VR? I've always experienced clients who are CEOs, decision makers, and they never want to wear the headset. Any advice?
Yeah. All right, we're gonna talk about this because this is really the biggest hurdle I had when I was starting out as well. Because we had a lot of amazing people coming through our office, some celebrities, and it was also very, very hard to get them to try a VR headset. What are some of the reasons someone might not try a VR headset? They don't want pictures taken of them. They don't want to be laughed at. You know, it can be very, you can feel very insecure if you're in a headset and you can't see the people around you and they might be laughing, taking pictures. You can mess up your hair. You can mess up your makeup. There's the sense of feeling dumb if you put on a headset and you're grabbing, I thought I had VR controllers around here. You're grabbing controllers that look like a video game controller. And if you're, you know, a CEO of a major company and you're like, I don't play video games, like you don't want to be handed those controllers. So some of the low hanging fruit that we have found helps get people into VR. One is, oh, there's a VR controller. Yeah, I mean, you know, these look kind of similar. To the untrained eye, they're going to be like, I don't want to hold this because it looks too much like this. And I don't do this. So some of the low hanging fruit, one is start by you being the one in VR. So I will often try to demonstrate everything I want someone else to experience for themselves in a VR headset, and I'll try to do it in a very clean, simple way. I'll either try to use hand tracking so they never touch this at all, or I'll make like every button do the same thing. So literally, like if they press a button or pull a trigger, like there's the one action that they can do, move the scene forward, whatever, and you're trying to minimize the opportunity for them to feel dumb. When you are, by the way, being kind of the host who's showing an experience, please, 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 so important, dampen the spectator camera or use a third-person camera entirely, especially if you've got a big screen in your office like I do, where we usually have people watching someone in VR. If you're capturing all the little shakes of someone inside a VR headset, and that's projected on a giant screen, you will make people sick. Don't have to be in VR to get sick from VR if you're watching someone in VR. So two things you can do. I've done the same thing in both Unity and Unreal. One is you do what's called interpolating, which is basically dampening exactly what's happening. So even if this is like shaking and someone's kind of like looking around, it's going to come out on the screen as like a much smoother view and much more tolerable to look at. Or you just go outside the view entirely and you have another camera that's over here, and then you have an avatar, or, you know, you just see the headset or something that's broadcasting what's happening over here. So then a lot of times if you go through the experience and they see like, oh, it's not so scary, like they might take the headset and put it on and give it a try. The other thing, though, is always have an alternative. Like if the interactivity and there's a decision making that's really going to come from them trying this for themselves, you know, if they're just not going to go into VR, have a way that they can do it with a mouse and a keyboard or a touch screen like an iPad or something like that. Just have those alternatives, because there always will be people who don't want to do it. Unfortunately, you're often going to run into people who are also like, I tried VR back in 2015. It was terrible. It made me sick. I'm never going to do it again. And in some cases, I want to be like, please, please just try it one more time. But I also understand that, you know, people were passing off things like Google Cardboard as VR when it's more of like a 360 experience, and then they feel sick because they start to move on axes that Google Cardboard doesn't support. And then sometimes VR sickness can stay with you for a long time, like hours and hours and hours. So I try not to be judgmental of anyone who's just like, I don't like VR, I'm not going to put on the headset, but I do try to at least show how much fun I'm having when I'm in the headset, because then, you know, maybe they'll feel like they're missing out a little bit and like, okay, I'll just try it for a second. Similarly too, like here's the other thing too, is you make it very non-committal. You might even take the straps off. Here's me being crazy. Take the straps off, and you can just be like, take a peek. Like you just want them to like don't shove it in their face, but be like, treat it like opera glasses, and just be like, can you just look at this real quick? And they might dip in and go, oh yeah, that's cool.
No,
and then they're looking more and more and more, and then suddenly they're like, oh my god, this is amazing, and then they won't take it off. So there's all these little tricks to like try to get someone more comfortable, but it's it's like selling something. You never want to push to the point where they feel uncomfortable.
That's true.
We have another question. It's from Alfredo. It says, during a VR experience, what is the most important thing that you can think should be taken care of so that the storytelling experience is a good experience?
I want to make sure I understood that. What's the most important thing about a good VR storytelling experience?
Yeah, it says, during a VR experience, what is the most important thing that you think should be taken care of so that the storytelling experience is a good experience?
That's a really good question, because it depends on the purpose of the experience. Like I will say, anytime there is a live interactive component, like some of the VR theater stuff we're about to talk to, the onboarding is so important. You need people to know what their role in this experience is. If they need to interact with actors and performers, what are they doing here? What's the expectation? If this is a platform they've never used before, you need to kind of walk them through it. I want to give one quick example of a time I think that's handled really well, which was something called the Under Presents, which is still a free app you can get on the Quest Store. But this is kind of a immersive theater, Sleep No More sort of world that sometimes had live actors. And when they did a live show of Tempest, they were able to get over one of these big hurdles that's happened for other live VR events, where people will buy a ticket having never done VR before, and then they have all this trouble like getting into the experience, and then it doesn't work, and then they want refunds, and that's always sad. What the Under Presents did was they made it so that in order to buy a ticket, you had to go through the introduction to the experience first. You had to do this onboarding where they taught you how to use the controls and interact with the world. And then you literally go up to a virtual box office and you select your showtime and buy your ticket, and all the credit card payment stuff happens from within VR. So I thought that was brilliant, because they were guaranteeing that no one could even buy a ticket unless they understood all the things they needed to about engaging with their world and the particular rules of physics and movement and everything that happened there. So I have really good intro tutorials. I also think about something like Tilt Brush, which I still think is one of the best first experiences you can give someone in VR, because of the curve. I mentioned during our Dell project that we wanted to have something that'd be very easy for people who've never done VR before, but also had like these levels of Easter eggs and more complexity if you wanted to do that. I think Tilt Brush does that so well. You put on a headset, you open up Tilt Brush for the first time, and it just starts to like make this glow, and you're like, oh, it's glowing, what do I do? And you squeeze the trigger, and now you're painting with light, and you're like, oh my god. And that's enough to like keep someone pretty happy and occupied, especially if they've never done VR before, for a pretty long time. Everyone writes their name, everyone starts to realize like, oh, I can move around, and they start to draw mazes and trees and stuff like that. But they might still be doing that having only ever squeezed the trigger. They might not know yet that there's all these other tools for changing color, changing brushes, bringing in 3D models to paint on top of. And that's all there if you dig for it. But what they're not doing, which is an issue I see with some VR experiences, is you're not being overwhelmed with that at the beginning. You're not getting this cognitive load of like, imagine if you opened up Tilt Brush and it was like, here's where all the brushes are, here's where the colors are, squeeze this trigger to do this, press this button to do this. It's like, all of that might be true, and all of that might be great for a super user, but it is not what someone should be seeing the first time they open the experience. So that kind of way of approaching any kind of VR experience, I think, is really important. Also, from a storytelling perspective, try not to be in situations where you suddenly just appear in the middle of a room. I find that's one of the weirdest things I see in VR experiences all the time, and that's so different from our experience in the real world. Like the only time you would just suddenly be in the middle of a room is if you had amnesia or you were kidnapped. Neither of those are good situations. So why bring that over into VR? Like have some kind of situation where you're starting in, a lobby or with other people. If it is a social experience, have something that like really eases you in before you're in kind of the main room. We've had a lot of discussions with my company about skeuomorphism, and skeuomorphism, for anyone who doesn't know, basically means trying to replicate something in the real world in a digital medium. And so in virtual reality, for example, you could replicate exactly the experience of going to a theater. You know, you're walking on the street and you see a theater and there's a big marquee sign that says this show tonight, and you walk into the lobby and you buy a ticket and you go and you sit down in your assigned seat, and the lights go down and the curtains go up and the show happens, and you know to be quiet because that's the way that we all behave in theaters if you're a good person. But even though that's great from a cognitive load standpoint, and it's going to make someone feel very comfortable because they know what they're supposed to do in that experience, you're missing out on all the opportunities of what you can do in VR, playing with physics and scale. And like, why would you give someone a nosebleed seat that's 200 feet away from the stage when you could let them fly around and treat the entire theater as their own personal dollhouse? And again, these are all things that you don't want to force them to do. With theater, I know I'm kind of cutting into like the next thing I'm going to talk about, but we always, when we build a theater show, we want to make it possible for someone to just put on a VR headset, not touch any controllers, and just watch a really compelling show without moving at all, as though they were in a seat. But for the Fortnite generation, for anyone who wants to run around and interact with everything and throw things and pick things up, we want that to be also a valid way to experience a show. So tailoring across those different audiences, I think, is really key, and making everyone feel like they're learning how to use the experience. They're never feeling stupid, and there's a lot of opportunities to experience the show or the whatever, the story, the experience the way they want to.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, no more questions. I think we can continue.
All right, let me share my screen. Yeah, it's so weird. I've got share sound grayed out. I wonder why. I've never seen that before. All right, so let's talk a little about theater. So in 2021, this is Into the Woods agony. This was the first time we started to play with MetaHumans and mocap suits, and we were tremendously happy about how it felt, in particular, to be in VR while someone was emoting full body, hands, eyes, mouth, etc., in kind of a theatrical context. And so from here, we're like, well, we have to find a way to bring this into virtual reality and Unreal Engine, because this is a totally different ballgame from hanging out with people in VR chat with low polygons and much more limited performance. So fortunately, in that just a few months later, I had some friends over at Actors Theater of Louisville, this incredibly prestigious theater over in Kentucky, say they wanted to start putting a show on of Christmas Carol, a one-man production, and they wanted to have MetaHumans as part of the scrim. So I'll actually fast forward a couple slides so you can see it over here. So on the left here, you see that we had a real actor in Louisville, and our MetaHumans would get projected onto these curtains around, so all the ghosts and everything that happens over the story of A Christmas Carol could work in this context. But the more we talked to Actors Theater of Louisville about what they wanted to do, it was like, well, they don't just want MetaHumans and all the costumes. They want, in many cases, the environment and the lighting and all these other things too. So we just kind of raised our hand and said, like, maybe there should also be an entirely virtual version of the show. And then that sparked a really fun discussion, because we got to talk about what works really well in an actual theater and what works really well in a virtual theater. So we spoke about things like, how do we change the script to be more dynamic? How do we tighten it? Because the show in an actual theater is an hour and a half long, and we wanted the VR show to be maximum maybe 40 minutes. And so we had some synchronicity with like props and blocking and set design, but we could also do things like make the Ghost of Christmas Future 60 feet tall, whereas, you know, here she's limited by the height of the actual theater that she's in. So those discussions were really cool. To back up a little bit, we had done those experiments. We started to play with what it felt like to be in VR. We have done this show every year since 2021. What you're getting a little hint of up here, by the way, was what we did with AI. So going back to our Vodafone showroom, we got really excited about the potential of virtual reality and speaking to an AI. And we realized we could kind of give our actor a bit of a break here. So some people are like, oh, great, I don't need actors anymore. I can just use AI instead. That's not what we wanted to do. That's never what we're going to do. But for an actor who's performing in virtual reality, there is a lot going on. You're thinking about equipment, you're thinking about your script, you're thinking about all the characters. Sometimes the sound dies for no reason. Sometimes your headset turns off for no reason. You thought it was plugged in, but it's actually dead. There's all these things that an actor needs to think about in VR that is so different from what's happening if they're on stage in the real world. And just like what we were talking about with our Four Seasons experience, you want to hide that as much as possible. You want everyone to just feel engaged with a performer. So the way we started to use AI was for the lobby experience, because when you come into this show, you begin in Charles Dickens' home. He invites you into his home. He's going to do this Dickensian recital to tell you the story of Christmas Carol. And we realized that we weren't giving our actor a chance to like get in character really, or like relax before the show is starting, because it's Dickens' home. So you're coming into the home and he's there to greet everyone who's coming in 30 minutes before the show starts. And then the show has to actually start. And it's just a lot for him to be doing continuously. So we said, hey, Ari Tars, our brilliant performer here, we said, how do you feel about us using 11 Labs, capturing your voice, and also using your Dickens avatar to engage with the people before the show. So then when the show starts, you can come out, you can say, oh, I hope you enjoyed talking to my automaton, and you kind of pick up this duplicate of your avatar and put them in a box and put them away. And now you're live and you go on with the real show. And that was so fun because not only did everyone get to have this really cool experience if they came early to the show with this really compelling AI, but they also got a sense of the tone of the show and the character, and they could ask all sorts of questions like, what's your favorite oil lamp, Charles Dickens, and get really interesting answers. And from a branding and company and business perspective, what a great mascot. If you ask Charles Dickens in our experience to tell you about Agile Lens and Alex Coulomb and the work we do, he will sell you on it all so much better than I ever could. I don't know how the training got that good all of a sudden, but he does such a good job of like pitching our services and our capabilities, and it's really something to behold. So you can bake all that in too, and like he knows he's not the real Charles Dickens. He knows that Ari Tar is going to come and replace him later on, but he also knows all the things Charles Dickens does. So there's this really interesting. I don't know how the training got. Yeah, sorry. Oh, that was just me echoing. But he does such a good job of like pitching. Yeah, sorry. I think I'm echoing on someone's computer. Yeah, but that was really fantastic. So we're gearing up right now for the 4th version of the show. Funnily enough, the very first year we did it, it was only available on Quest headsets, and we're using something called NVIDIA Cloud XR to stream the experience from the cloud because we wanted the full fidelity of Unreal Engine. Now, the past 2 years, we played with other methods of doing this, which involved, downloading the game through the Epic Game Store, doing it through regular pixel streaming in a browser, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing we keep hearing people say is like, I just want the level of accessibility to be able to put on a VR headset and just open up an app and now be in the live show the same way people have done with VR chat and the Under Presents. And so that's what we were doing this week. This week we had a little mini hackathon to build kind of a black box theater that had all the multiplayer working and felt like a good way to get all the full body tracking that we want into an experience that ultimately too can serve as a rehearsal space. If you're working in a virtual reality live show, any kind of live event, one thing you're likely to run into is the idea that you're going to want to constantly be testing in the latest Unreal Engine build, Unity build, whatever, which means you're constantly testing in something unstable. So you might have a meeting or a rehearsal set aside where you're just trying to block out a certain scene with the actor and the scene keeps crashing. And a lot of times there's no need to be on the most bleeding edge of what's possible with your build. So that's why this year we're making a very strong effort to be like, here's our rehearsal room. This is a stable, clean thing that can do multiplayer. It's not going to have all the latest features and lights and show cues and everything that we're going to be building separately. But anytime we need to do a rehearsal or act out or do anything with our director that doesn't require all the other tech, just like in the real world, instead of rehearsing in an actual theater on an actual stage, you could go into a room somewhere and just do it there. We're trying to make that possible, but virtually. So that's just one of the many things we've learned over the past couple of years. And the challenge, of course, is like, how do you get this all to run standalone? So this is the Brockman Hall for Opera, which you saw very briefly at the beginning of the presentation. And Vive had me give a talk at ViveCon in 2021 about the process of optimizing that very heavy VR model to run on a Vive Focus 3. And as you might imagine, it was a lot of work. And then to have a MetaHuman on stage who could also like talk to you and all that, which wasn't AI. It was like some really basic performance capture. So then, we know what we're getting into, trying to figure out how to have like 5 or 6 metahumans on stage. Of course, working on Body of Mine this year was a big influence in us feeling like we're learning enough about optimization to make this show look good and run well. But also, you might recall earlier when I said, when talking about Tilt Brush and Gravity Sketch, that I feel like people often build too much in VR and they're not leaving enough up to the imagination. So sketches are a great way to excite the imagination. Other things too, darkness, shadow, light, hinting at something without actually showing it explicitly. Think of the shark in Jaws and how much more terrifying it is because it was broken when they were filming it and they had to cut down on so many of the scenes that actually showed you Jaws. And so similarly, I think a lot of VR experiences can benefit from having less and implying things and filling you with dread or excitement without actually showing a thing. In the first year we did Christmas Carol, we had such heavy scenes as we'd load from, you know, the Ghost of Christmas Past to the Ghost of Christmas Future, that we actually needed to do a big fade out after each scene, which at first was like, oh no, that's going to be terrible. And the reason we faded out was because it would make the experience really glitchy while I was loading the next scene. But we actually found it was a really nice little quiet time break. I think back to like preschool and kindergarten, and like you'd have all this like crazy cacophony of like, oh, live show, screaming, blood, die Scrooge. And then like we fade the lights out. And then you have just this like very soft thing. We're loading the scene, but we have a clean channel of Ari's voice. And he's like, and that wraps up stave 1. And now we're going to begin stave 2, in which Scrooge will encounter, and he's, you know, he's doing his Dickens thing, even though he's playing all the characters. And there's actually something really nice about going from a very intense spectacle in virtual reality to like now nothing for your eyes, just audio, and then you fade back up and you're back into it. And it feels like the same stagecraft you'd use in real theater. So that's some of the stuff in the back of our mind right now as we begin to craft what this year's version of Christmas Carol is going to be. Here's just a little trailer that we had made for one of the productions. There's Marley and Ari playing Scrooge in full body motion capture. The candle, by the way, was really fun because the candle actually started off as a crutch. Ari would be holding his script in his hand when he didn't know his lines. And we're like, well, it feels really weird just having an avatar waving around a hand all the time. So we're like, let's put something in his hand. So we did the candle, and they were like, oh, that's really cool because it like lights up his face and it makes it all more intimate. And so then even once he did have his lines memorized, we're still like, let's keep that candle. It just adds to the sense of coming together to be like, let me tell you a story, children. Let's all come closer. The problem, though, of course, in the first year, we found a lot of times Ari would like, because he's not actually holding the candle, he'd be like tipping it in a way where you'd be like, oh, careful, you're going to light the sofa on fire. So we had to practice being like, always hold it upright. And eventually we actually got to the point where we just created a swap where we were no longer tracking his hand, and we just had the code in Unreal Engine to always keep the candle vertical, just so that was no longer a thing that could even happen. Again, trying to reduce the cognitive load of our poor actor here who's working so hard. Yeah. And so there's our metahuman of Ari, and then there's the actual actor, Greg Maupin, who is in there. And it was also really fun. One thing, if you're working on a virtual reality experience, is don't feel like you just need to work with tech people. Work with creative people. Work with artistic people who are masters of their craft coming from other disciplines. So for this production, especially in 2021, we were working with really talented set designers and costume designers and lighting designers and sound designers who had never done anything with tech before, but we knew they could put on a really compelling live show on a real stage. So we're helping them translate their craft into a virtual medium. You know, we would make the costume that looks the same as the sketch the costume designer did. We would make the virtual light that looked the same as the light in the physical space, but we're helping them translate their vision in a way that I think was made sure that we never felt like we were just doing a tech demo, and there was always this core artistic vision behind it all. Here's the Ghost of Christmas Present on the scrim versus in virtual reality. You can see how we match the costume pretty well. And then here's a little bit behind the scenes of some of the stuff we were doing with like having these cues to be able to trigger stuff. And we would do these tests to try to understand how the performance capture was translating between what Ari was doing in the real world versus what was happening here. You can see he's holding the candle at that bad angle. But we would look at this and then we would treat it not so much like just direct performance capture. We would treat it more like puppeteering and mask work. And we would try to identify those things where you had to bend your body in a slightly different way from what you were expecting in order to achieve the result you want. So, you know, in something like Body of Mine, you're just dealing with like, oh God, that's not how my body wants to move. And we're building that into the discomfort of the experience. But Ari, as an actor, he is trying to make sure his performance is coming off exactly the way that he wants it to, which means he needs to be able to understand what his tool, what his character is doing as much as possible, so he can augment his own actual performance to achieve the results that he's after in VR. Yeah, and so you can see that we actually would have him often jump between Scrooge and Dickens. Fun fact, one of the ways that we optimized was we actually have Scrooge and Dickens as exactly the same metahuman, and the only thing we're changing is the facial hair. You can see it a little bit in the eyes that it's actually the same character. And so then we're not swapping out quite as much RAM, you know, as we jump from one to the other. So a little peek behind the scenes. In the beginning, you see some of the cues we'd have to, you know, force a certain thing to happen or trigger a certain moment in the show. And working from the cloud, I mentioned at the beginning that we had this very robust system for making sure that people would be able to experience the full Unreal Engine-ness of this. So working with my pal, Eitan Maynor, who's a wizard at back-end cloud stuff, we built this way to spin up virtual machines, pixel streaming, and we could monitor all the attendees of the show, and we could see, okay, their computer's online, they're logged in. And this also was great for customer support, because for anyone who was experiencing the show not in VR, you see all these little purple play buttons. We could basically like remote into their session, and it's like, oh, they're stuck in the wall, and we could like help move them or whatever. So that was really handy for kind of being over a virtual audience's shoulder. And then we had all these things that told us like the virtual machine is online, Steam VR is active, you know, they're in the lobby right now, they're inside the experience, they're currently pixel streaming. This was a really useful backend, which we then piggybacked over to a few other theater productions we did, including this one that I really loved. This was called The Orchard Off Broadway, starring Mikhail Baryshnikov and Jessica Hecht. This was a synchronous VR show where there was a real audience at the Baryshnikov Arts Center in New York City watching Mikhail and everyone else performing live, while at the same time that live show was happening, there was a virtual audience either in VR or in their browser using pixel streaming, the same system you just saw, engaging with this digital twin of the theater in a really different kind of surreal way. You know, we're playing with the idea that like it looks like the real theater, but you go into these rooms and there's all these other crazy things happening, almost like these little mini games. And we did it in an on-rails way where if you literally just sat back and watched, it would kind of move through each experience. But, you know, if you want to play Operation on Baryshnikov's chest, like you can do that. Like all the interactivity is available for anyone who wants to play with it. So, you know, again, just kind of piggybacking our approaches to different technology in different contexts was really fun. This was also where we got really into doing our show control with something called OSC. OSC stands for Open Sound Control. This is an out-of-the-box plugin with Unreal Engine. And we were nervous about having a big multiplayer experience for the Orchard Off Broadway because we thought there might be days when there's 1,000 people coming to the show, and we do not know how to make an experience that can run 1,000 people at the same time. But what we realized was, first of all, people didn't need to see each other. And also, the only things that they really needed to know was where the show was, and if we needed to move them to like the next part of the experience, they needed to receive a certain cue. So using OSC, we were able to use the software QLab in the actual theater to basically have a single operator control the virtual show and the physical show at the same time. So that operator could press a button and it triggers something in the physical space, a light going down or whatever, and then that same signal would go out to, let's say, 1,000 single player instances of our digital twin of the show, and they're all receiving that same signal and moving on to the next part of the show. So it's kind of it feels like multiplayer, tastes like multiplayer, but it's not multiplayer, and it drastically cut down on the load and some of the breakpoints we were concerned about for that show.
Wow.
Okay, so I do have a little like bonus thing we can go to after this, but certainly want to pause there because we're already, I think, an hour and a half almost into this. But yes, please do, you know, reach out if you want to know any more about these things. Agile Lens, my training center is called Alex Coulomb Presents. I'm on most social media at iBrews. I'm probably the most active on YouTube and Twitter at iBrews. And then you can find me on LinkedIn as my name, and I'm there as well. And yeah, any questions?
Oh, yeah. So we have some questions in here. So, okay, let's go with Sam again. He's asking, what do you think Vision Pro needs to have more presence in the market?
Do I think Vision Pro needs more presence in the market?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I think the Vision Pro is a remarkable device. I got one day one. I think it's doing so many things that Oculus has not been doing for many years. The user experience in here is incredible. The resolution is insane. I will never fly on a plane anymore and not have this. The immersive environments are so beautiful. The way that it seamlessly connects to other Apple devices, and I can have my MacBook Pro and changing, you know, resolution and doing an extended desktop. As a productivity tool, it's amazing. What it's missing, though, is all the third-party content that helped the App Store on iPhone take off. You know, these devices are not that accessible. They're very expensive. Apple's not giving discounts on them to developers, and they're kind of stifling the ability to build up the ecosystem that they need, because there's so much potential in this device. But you know, Agile Lens is not going to spend 6 months building an app for the Vision Pro that maybe at best a couple thousand people are going to download. So it's this chicken and egg problem where all the developers are waiting for more people to be in Vision Pro, but all the people who are thinking maybe I'll buy a Vision Pro even when the price goes down are still like, okay, but what can I do in there besides watch movies? And so we're still missing, you know, these killer apps and the things that are really going to push the envelope there. My killer app right now for it is just using the operating system. It's just the ability to have a virtual office anywhere where I've got a big screen for my MacBook and I've got Slack and Discord and a 3D movie all playing around me. And that requires nothing from any of the third-party developers out there. Also, would love more direct support for Unreal Engine, just because Apple and Epic Games, for those who don't know, they're having a bit of a fight over, you know, some legal things. And so the support for Unity from Apple has been much, much higher than what is possible with Unreal. But today I was able for the very first time to compile Unreal Engine with Xcode 16. And I'm currently trying to build to Vision OS 2.0. It wasn't working before. When we're off this call, I'll go and check, and maybe I'll have a working Unreal Engine MetaHuman demo in my Vision Pro, which is what I've been trying to do for a few days now.
We have another question from Richard. He's asking, what plugins other than those mentioned with Meta and OptiTrack do you use? Or do you require other tools outside of Unreal Engine?
Yeah, that was about how we do multiplayer. What was the start of that question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so
yeah.
OptiTrack is not the method that we wanted to use. It's incredibly expensive, and we're lucky that our client could be like, yes, let's spend, you know, 6 figures in OptiTrack cameras and have them overnight shipped here for tomorrow so they can all be set up. That's also not very portable. The video you saw at the beginning of the Four Seasons section actually wasn't even in our Austin showroom. You can see, you know, this is the Austin showroom with the gallery and all that. But this video here, this is actually the one and only time where we took this experience on tour. So this is like a Hilton ballroom in Aspen, Colorado. And you can see, especially with that truss system, all the work it took to set up OptiTrack to be in this totally different space with these Aruco markers and everything to kind of make sure that it's a clean tracking experience. What we wanted to do, and I'll just stop sharing my screen for a second so I can look at the camera. What we wanted to do was use either Meta shared spatial anchors, which just turned out to be super unreliable. Shared spatial anchors are supposed to be the way that MetaQuest headsets can just kind of see each other and be in a shared space together, but we just haven't found that that's consistent enough to work for a good experience. We're pushing Meta. We're trying to get them to help us make that better. Just hasn't happened yet. The anti-latency system, all the green lights on the ceiling, that would have been great too, because that's actually a fairly low-cost way to make sure that everyone basically has the same tracked coordinate system. All these little IR diodes are giving you a constellation, as it's called, that is totally unique. So as long as all of them can see that using a little thing that we'd put on top of the headset that just looks up, then we'd be fine. The wind of the tent made that impossible, but this system has been used with great success by like Felix and Paul. If you've heard of the Infinite, this International Space Station experience they have, where they actually let many people walk through a life-size version of the International Space Station in VR, that's exactly the system they're using to track people throughout it. So, you know, the Meta shared spatial anchors, OptiTrack, Vicon are similar things, anti-latency. The other one we've been, again, playing with, but with limited success, is the Vive Ultimate Trackers. So another potentially cool thing about the MetaQuest Pro that didn't turn out to be so great was these controllers for the MetaQuest 3 are using IR, and these are looking for the headset, and it's triangulating with the headset. The MetaQuest Pro controllers have little cameras in them, and so it has inside-out tracking, but there's no infrared, and so sometimes you'll be in the MetaQuest Pro, and the controllers and the headset just don't see each other. They basically need to do this kind of shared spatial anchor method of all understanding the space in the same way, and that's how they see each other, and that's a little bit of a mess. And I bring that up because the Vive Ultimate Trackers are, in theory, like a better version of those MetaQuest Pro controllers. They don't need the Vive lighthouses looking in and triangulating where those are in space. They have their own cameras, and so it's inside out. And so we've been trying to see if we can calibrate those Vive Ultimate Trackers in a clean enough way that you could also have this very open multiplayer scenario where they see each other well enough and can calibrate with each other well enough that you could just have 6 people all with one of those on their headset walking around and have them all talk to each other very well. And if you are working with the Vive ecosystem and you're not dealing with a client who's like, I don't like these headsets, Vive does have an LBE method, which is very good. It's being used by things like what's it called? I think zero latency is an experience over in Vegas. And so that's just using Vive Focus 3s and the way that those headsets can all kind of scan a space and have the same point cloud map of that space. And that shared coordinate system works pretty well for Vive Focus 3, as well as the Vive XR Elite headset.
Okay, you have some questions there, Stephanie. I think it'll be good if you just choose a couple of ones and then we can wrap it up.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let me see. Okay, from Jess. Okay, let's do this one. To connect AI to the MetaHuman, is there a plugin for that? What is the process for?
Yeah, so the two that we've used, one is called In-World AI, INWORLD, and that's also being used for a really cool new venture from Neil Stevenson, who of course wrote Snow Crash and kind of coined the term metaverse. So that's become a popular one. That's how we did both our Vodafone experience as well as our first version of the Christmas Carol AI Dickens. So In-World has an out-of-the-box plugin that works with MetaHumans now. The one we've been using more lately is called ConvAI, CONV AI, and we are using that primarily because they have much better mobile support and they can work with a standalone headset, which is what we're targeting for a lot of what we're doing now. You can also, connect things directly to ChatGPT. There's just a little bit more latency because there's a much larger data set there that needs to process. But it's very cool and a little bit unsettling how fast this is evolving and how we're really getting to a point where you could just be talking in VR to a MetaHuman and it kind of feels like a real person.
Yeah, that's true. Makes sense. And we have another one. It says, what are the biggest challenges for these live XR gears? Can they be streamed globally without any latency?
Yeah, that's a great question. I could do a laundry list of the biggest challenges. Latency is definitely a huge one. If you really want someone to feel like they are right there engaged with the performer and that performer is making eye contact with you and the performers are making eye contact with each other, anything can throw off that feeling of the immediacy you'd get if you were watching a real live show. If the audio is a little bit off sync from what the mouth is doing, if there's a pause between the actors talking to each other, if you feel like the actor's making eye contact with you, but there's a lag and then you move and they're still looking at the place where you were, anything like that starts to break those, I want to say those laws of the magic circle, as it's called sometimes, that makes you feel like you're in this magical place where there's theatrical things happening. Certainly the server load is tricky. Like we've had problems in the past few years with our server just crashing and it's like, we don't know why. It's a new error we've never had before. And we have a lot of contingencies that like get things up and running. Mocap was a huge problem. We were using Rococo for the past couple of years and we'd always end up in situations where like one of the sensors would break and our actor would have to improvise, which he's very good at, and like trying to, give a reason why Scrooge suddenly doesn't have his working right arm. A stroke is an easy reason, but he's actually found more creative ways than that. This year, we're actually doing a combination for mocap of the MetaQuest Pro for the eye and mouth tracking, and then we're using Mocopi from Sony. And what we like about the Mocopi system is it's dead simple. It's like you charge all 6 of these little pucks together. They're all labeled. They say like left elbow, left knee, right knee, and they stick on you in a super simple way. And we're basically combining the full body tracking that's giving you the 6 points of tracking with everything that the MetaQuest headset sees, the hand tracking, the eye tracking, the mouth tracking. And it's actually giving us a really reliable and clean mocap method that we think will probably be what we're using later this year. Because the biggest thing you want to watch out for, not just for a live show, but any VR experience, is like, where are all the pain points? Where are all the places it can break? And is there anything you can do to eliminate those things entirely, or at least drastically reduce the probability of something going wrong?
Great, excellent. Alex, one of the metrics to measure the success of any webinar are the questions. There are a ton of questions, and I think many people will be wondering how can they get in touch with you, and if you have any services towards Latin America, or is there any requirements for a project that you will be, attending or considering?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any plans yet to come to Latin America. I would love to. Someone please invite me. But we do a lot of remote work that certainly could make its way the same way that I'm talking to you right now over Zoom. This is how we do a lot of our Unreal Engine training. If you go to unrealengine.com/training and you find the course catalog there, most of those courses I either had a hand in creating or I've at least taught them before. And so if you work for a company or you want to get together a few people and say, hey, we all want to learn MetaHumans or the collaborative viewer template or the variant manager, some of these things that we're also teaching at Unreal Fest in Seattle, yeah, reach out and we can do like a 2-hour Zoom session. We'll send you project files and kind of go through the whole thing, give you a recording. That's how the training center operates. But then just in terms of client work and all that, yeah, and we've done plenty of projects where we've never actually met our client because they're in Japan or in some other place that we just haven't found a fitting reason to go to yet. I did get to do a really fun thing in Seoul, South Korea, where I didn't think I was actually going to need to go there. And then they're like, actually, you really do need to be here. So they brought me over and that was nice, but happy to start off virtually.
Okay, great. Well, we want to express our deepest gratitude. Alex, it's been awesome, an amazing webinar. We're really thrilled with everything that we just heard. You speak with passion, and it seems like it just doesn't seem you have a lot, but a lot of knowledge, and I think it'll be very helpful for many people. So thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this webinar, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next one. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Alex.